hi there, Ollie Anderson here. You're listening to Creative Status. If this is the first time you found the podcast, then welcome. This is a place where we talk about the creative process of being a human being, moving towards wholeness, stepping away from our egos, our sense of identity, and basically moving from a place of fragmentation to wholeness. If you don't know, my name is Ollie Anderson. I'm a creative performance coach, but I also like talking about these philosophical themes around humanity, realness, creativity. That's what the podcast is about. Today's interview is with a guy called Ranga Padmanabhan. Ranga is super cool. I met him on the internet and we got into some deep conversations. His whole thing is that he's just trying to let go of all his labels. He's used psychedelics to help him on that journey. He's learned loads of lessons. He's trying to make peace with his own death, which is very important, in my opinion. If you've heard the podcast before or you've read my books or anything, you know that I like to talk about death. And ultimately, this is just a really fun conversation coming up. We talk about all kinds of things. We talk about cats and dogs. We talk about death. We talk about psychedelics. We talk about the ego. We talk about fragmentation to wholeness. We talk about being a real human being. There's loads of cool stuff in here, loads of amazing insight. I'm so grateful that I found Ranga and got him to come on this podcast. So yeah, really hope you enjoyed this episode. Loads of insight, like I just said. If you find it helpful, if it unlocks some stuff, unblocks some stuff, unleashes the real you, then please leave a review somewhere. Ranga, thank you so much for your time. Everybody else, hope you enjoy this. Here we go. Boom. Oh, hi there, Ranga. Thank you so much for joining me today on this episode of Creative Status. I feel like this is about to be a very deep conversation, so I'm a little bit nervous. But before we get into it, would you like to introduce yourself and tell people what you do, what you're all about, and what you want to get from this conversation?
Yes. Hello, Ollie. Thank you for having me here. I don't do well with definitions because I always feel like definitions are very constricting. We kind of tend to say what we are doing at that point. So in that terms, I'll tell you, there is just one thing I'm doing here is working towards being equanimous towards my death.
Wow.
Because the nature of our reality is very temporary. It's always changing. And I have come to my realizations in psychedelics that it's our clinging to that some kind of stability in this uncertainty that brings suffering. And I have a couple of dogs and few guinea pigs, who if given good health reasons, like if I outlive them, they're gonna have to witness their death. And I believe that attachment is quite strong, and it's something that I have to work towards, right? In turn, I also believe that, I don't know if you know about existential therapy by Dr. Irvin Yalom. He suggests that when we are sad about the death of other beings, we are internally raising awareness to our own death. We might not get it to our conscious awareness, but it's just that our own death is going to come that makes us so fearful, and not just the sadness that we are not going to see the being that has departed. Right. So I would like, as you ask me, who am I? I'm just working towards my death. Any being it could be. So yes, we can start from there.
That is an amazing place to start the conversation from. So we've been talking literally for 2 minutes and we're already onto the death topic, which is basically one of my favorite topics in the whole world, because like you, I am also kind of working towards my own death and just embracing the journey between now and then, whenever it happens to be. And I found that by thinking about death daily and just reflecting on it, it's made me like way more present, way more alive, but on an even deeper level, potentially, it's made me move more. And by move more, I just mean that it's got me out of this static idea about what it means to be me, Ollie Anderson. In fact, it's helped me to realize that that is just an idea, that really there is no me. I'm just like a thing experiencing a relationship with itself and everything else. And by living like that, it's helped me to basically just create a life that I really love and enjoy. So let's follow this thread a little bit further. what have you learned on this journey so far of embracing and, I guess, facing your own inevitable demise?
Yeah, you beautifully worded it. Before, I get into that, it's beautiful what you're doing with respect to at least thinking about death. It might not be the actual thing, and it might not even be what you think about death in your altered state of consciousness. For example, on a high edible of cannabis or on a microdosing of psychedelics, it can be much more, it could bring much more fears and sensations in your body. But even the thinking of death is helpful to ground us. I kind of try to do that every time when I am caught up in a situation which I prefer to not have that particular emotion. Sometimes I get angry at my co-workers at my work, and I know at that point I have gotten to a point where I believe
Wow.
anger is not even justified for a minute second. The righteousness is not gets us through. So I have to drop it. How do I drop it? And it's that nature of death, right? Everything on this planet here is going to pass away. So why delay any moment of rejoicing with it, being with it?
Yeah. Like
But
that's
to yeah,
sorry.
yeah, yeah.
Well, I was just going to say that's why the death thing is so important, I think, because it
Yeah.
shows you the value of your time. Like, time is the most precious thing that we have. And if you can understand that, it affects the choices that you make. You'll either choose something real or unreal, which I'm sure we'll get into as we go down this rabbit hole we've opened up. But with that example you've just given of anger and the righteousness and all the expectations and bullshit that come with it, if you are not conscious and aware that you're a temporary being, then that's when you start to feed into all the negative, fragmentary, unreal things and experiences that are here on life's menu. But basically, what you seem to be saying is you're so aware of your mortality that it's made you more real. It's made you more alive. It's made you more virtuous, even if you want to throw that word out there.
Yes. So you asked me about how this started, or perhaps like what was your question before this thing?
Basically, just what have you learned by putting yourself on this path of
What have I learned?
yeah.
I think more than learning, I would say what has happened along the steps of the path. So I think my initial psychedelic trips were pretty heavier, in the sense that they would be focused on my personal storylines, right? I had these kind of traumas from my childhood, or these kind of abuses from my so and so times, that I have so much anger towards them. But in my first few trips were initially about dropping that baggage, right? And it put me in a state of such present moment. I wasn't thinking about things. I was able to be there, right? And slowly, further on and on, the trips offered something new. Like whenever took a psychedelic, it did not take me into a personal storyline. Like, well, I am going through this. It
Wow.
broke all that and question at the fundamental level. I keep saying, I. What is this I? And and that's the moment I look back and you see that you can give this I is convenient for conversation, but if you see its nature is always changing. We pick up things, we have so many things going on. Like maybe I get it in my head, I become dumb, I don't speak this language, I don't communicate with the world, but there is still an I that within me that resides, right? So I was being able to be aware of that particular part during my subsequent psychedelic trips. And to be honest, in my psychedelic trips, thinking about death just was kind of very natural, in the sense that it made sense. Right now I would be much more sadder knowing that, oh fuck, my dogs are gonna die in a few years, versus like on a peak of a, let's say, 300 mcg acid, I would be like, yeah, it's the nature of the reality. Like, why? What is there to be sad about?
Wow.
It's everything.
Yeah.
It's everything is changing form. Like nothing ever that dies here goes
Wow.
anywhere. You see,
Yeah.
like physically you die, your body, let's say, it's burnt or buried based on whatever customs and traditions people follow. But either way, it becomes smoke and goes to the air, ashes to the ground, or when you're buried, food for the other beings. And where are we going, right? There is no going anywhere, even physically. This concept of I is just a very
Yeah.
temporary thing. That's
Yeah.
where I think the awareness comes into play. Whatever we call as I think the I between me and the I between you is very common, right? It's just the awareness. I don't
Yeah.
think anything else is common between us. As in, like,
Wow.
all other things are temporary. It doesn't matter. Like the language you speak, it's amazing. We could connect and communicate in it. But the height you are, the color you are, it doesn't matter. What you and I, if I had to define and you had to define, we would end up having the same definition, because you and I are the same thing, right? And this awareness that we are awareness is something that we try to have a technique to build towards, like sustain that awareness in this field, rather than attaching ourselves with the ego, which is ego. I would say in this case would be a very an automatic reactive mechanisms that's trying to survive, which has been doing for ages. Now it is just in this temporary nature of things, it is trying to hold on and create that. And you can see it out there. Most of the things, as you said, when we do it out of a ego based mind, we, instead of if you have 10 minutes to live, instead of searching for how to live the 11th minute, we would live the 10 minutes. That's the lesson we have to learn, instead of trying to expand what we got. That can happen very naturally when we are here and now.
It all comes down to presence, but when you're truly present, you are aware of wholeness. And this is something we talked about before. Like I mention it every flipping day of my life. It all boils down to either wholeness or fragmentation. When we have a fragmented relationship with our lives, we lack awareness because we are identifying with this concept that you're talking about, the concept of I. And if we can put ourselves in some situation where we can transcend that, either by having some kind of a peak experience where, I don't know, maybe we see something sublime in nature, or we have an amazing lovemaking session, or like we're riding a motorbike really fast, or we're taking psychedelics like you're talking about, or we have a religious experience. When we have a moment like that, we transcend the I and we connect back to wholeness for just a moment. And I think when we do that, it raises awareness, like we've said a few times now in this conversation, that we're just ideas. We don't really exist in the way that we think we do. And when we can step back from that, that's when life really opens up, and we don't actually have a fear of death anymore. That's what I found anyway. We don't really have fear of being judged. We don't have a fear of, risk or all these kind of things. We're not afraid of uncertainty anymore, because by getting an awareness of this wholeness and the fact that we are wholeness, or like you just said, and I love the way you said it, the awareness that we are awareness, we can kind of trust life and we can flow with it a lot more. But what I want to ask you now is, you keep talking about this thing about the pets, the dogs and the guinea pigs. And this is something that I think there's something there probably that is going to teach us some stuff that's quite interesting. So I think it's fair to say, based on what you're saying, like I'm making an assumption about you, you're not really scared of dying anymore, right? Like, is that fair to say?
I don't think so. The thing is that our ego is working so efficiently that it suppresses the fear of death for us to function naturally. So I do not think the work can be done when the situation is not there. So we can try to project ourselves into the future and think that we might be okay, but I truly believe until the moment comes, we won't know.
We won't know for sure. Yeah.
And each step along the way is all preparation for death in a way, right? It goes so well together. And the technique, any meditation technique you follow, it's kind of what you said, right? It's being to meditate is to be aware, right? You do not do anything. You cannot push or pull things. You simply drop whatever it is and you watch, right? We kind of go with this so much of inertia, in religions it would be called karma, but it's just inertia of cause and effect, and it's going, right? And all you got to do is like just stop and watch, and it stops, right? The moment you're aware of your ignorance, it stops being ignorance and it becomes awareness. Funnily enough, it's so paradoxical. So many things are paradoxical in this plane of existence. So, and With respect to combating my own death, of course not. Like, I definitely think there are steps along the way that I tend to deal with today's thing. I
Mm,
tend to maintain my equanimity, my present moment awareness with whatever that is
mm,
I'm doing.
mm,
Could just be just sitting, right?
mm.
So with respect to that, why I mentioned my dogs and the guinea pigs, because the when you have a human kid, according, if everything goes well, they outlive you, right? You
Mm,
really do not have a chance
mm,
to face that death. There is no
mm,
learning. But with respect to dogs, and now we got guinea pigs like 3 months back, right? And their lifespan is 5 to 7 years. So
mm,
you're having that. Okay, if you have your diet properly and you're going to live another 10 years, you're going to have to witness the death. And it's pretty
mm.
intense, these feelings that
Yeah, yeah.
come to awareness. So for
Wow.
example, when I talk with you, it's still, in order for me to maintain a conversation without getting detracted in that emotion, my ego
Mm,
is suppressing the fear and getting you
mm,
the content, right? When
mm,
I sit
mm,
for 1 hour for meditation, and if those thoughts originate,
mm,
all I could think about is, not think about what's happening, is this fear in mind is nothing but
mm,
sensations in the
mm,
body, and
mm,
these are changing. And I just have to practice to remain calm with it,
mm,
and that's
mm.
that's all it is about. And to answer your question again for the third time, I do not know until the day I die, if I'm going to be
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
frantically jumping
Yeah.
and running, or I'm going to sit like, be like, yes, I've had my life, this is good. I can go
Maybe
ahead.
maybe I need to reframe it because as you're talking, it's
Yes.
bringing me back to what you said right at the start. I think you used the word equanimity, right? It's about having equanimity around your
Yes.
own death. And I I think I was a bit naive saying, yeah, you're not scared. And I was kind of projecting my own stuff because I like to think that I'm not scared of dying. But you're right, maybe I'll get on my deathbed and I'll like be terrified. Like I don't know. But right now I have equanimity about my own death. Like it doesn't bother me. Like I know it's
Yes.
coming. And I feel like because I've got that awareness, I am making real choices every day. I'm making the choice towards wholeness and more expansion into wholeness as much as possible. And like, obviously, I'm just human. Like, we're not always doing that. But I think I have a very high degree of making real choices, which is paying off in my life. But if I think about animals in my life in the way that you're talking about, there's definitely a contradiction between the way I see life and the way I feel about those animals. So the animal I'm thinking about is
Yeah.
I don't have my own dog. I'm gonna get one, but I have a friend whose dog I dog sit all the time, and I love this fucking dog so much. Like it's actually crazy how much I love this dog. I've made so many amazing memories, taking it out on walks and all that kind of stuff. But when I think about my death, I don't I'm not projecting forwards and mourning anything. Like I'm not mourning the loss of myself. And I think it's
Yes.
because I've kind of detached from that idea of myself. But if I think about the death of that dog, like I know that is going to depress me so much, even
Yes.
though it's the same underlying principle. Like when that dog dies, okay,
Yes.
it's gonna return to wholeness, and like that dog is just an experience anyway. It's not filtering everything through ego, and it's present all the time, and blah 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 blah.
Beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah, but there's a contradiction inside me between
Yeah.
the way I attach to myself versus the way I attach to other people, and that attachment,
Yeah.
and dogs as well in this particular example. And
Yes.
so, what is going on there? Do you think? Like my attachment to that dog, is it because I'm projecting positive qualities of my own shadow onto it or something, or just I'm living vicariously through it as it's present and like, what do you think is going on? Like, I'm not mourning the death of myself, but I'm already mourning the death of that dog in the way that you are with your dogs and your guinea pig.
Yes, and I will go back to that part where I said I think our subconscious is doing an extremely nice job
Mm,
suppressing our own fear of death to keep us functional,
mm, mm,
right?
mm,
Because
mm.
we need to create that space and time, right?
Wow.
There is this meditation program. I do not know if you have heard about it. It's by SN Goenka.
No,
It's
I haven't.
Vipassana.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, yeah.
Vipassana. So he has around 200, 250 centers around the world, right? So the meditation program is basically 10 days silent retreat
Mm,
where they provide you accommodation and food, and it's all free and, donation based, so that you do not go with any sort of, oh, I paid for it, so I'm going to have to get something, You really
yeah.
go as a recluse where you don't have righteousness, like, when
Mm,
someone is giving you food, you're not going to complain. Sorry for adding those parts, but the whole point is to for a person to go there for 10 days,
mm,
and they do tell you a technique, but the technique is going to be very simple and straightforward. It's so simple that sometimes, our ego might complicate it, right? It's so simple. Just watch, keep watching, right? And what do I watch, because my eyes are closed, my it's a silent room, what am I going to watch? And watch whatever is happening within your body, right? And for 10 days you do not talk to anyone, you do not have any sort of communication with anyone, even through eye contact and stuff, and you don't read, you don't write, you don't engage your senses, right? So these 10 days when you go, what happens, right? Like, now you're creating the space in your consciousness for things to arise, because we distract ourselves, we most of our problems happen with not processing grief, trauma, or abuse, or whatever it can be, right? From minute to so big, not processing it instantly, right? Processing happens instantly, but we distract ourselves, not that we choose it, it's just that it becomes a coping mechanism. Our ego,
yeah.
it's defense mechanisms that are built very young, right? It's history passed down by hundreds of generations of people, right? Generational trauma. And it takes time for these things to stop, and for us to realize that, oh, I am actually like none of these baggages that I came with, right? But in order for you to realize that you're not these baggages, you need time to sit. But you never get time to sit because these baggages make you keep running, right? And it's a loop. It's a loop. So it gets so tiring. Some are lucky. Like, I consider myself very lucky because I don't know what got me into psychedelics. It would have been something similar to, I really like weed, right? Weed was good, and someone introduced psychedelics, saying that, oh, it's also something that would be curious. But it totally changed my perception towards uh, what is that's happening, right? And when I am saying all these to get to the part where, if you sit and see, your subconscious starts brewing things, a
Yes.
lot of things.
Yeah.
Many people
Yeah.
say they get bored, or they have work to do, as if the world is going to stop without them. But none of this are true. There is no boredom in truth.
Yeah.
You're
Yeah. Yeah.
bored
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
because you're complicating things.
Oh.
Sit. The whole life is a miracle. If you just sit for 10 days, you will understand there is
Yeah.
nothing
Yeah.
to be bored about. Even the term boring is a kind of a defense mechanism which you have to first break for the subconscious to give you certain other thoughts, right? And
Wow.
what I believe is, when I see other dogs, even though I know they are going to die, it doesn't make me as sad as it is the dogs that live with me, right? So there is some part that is changing, this habitual pattern of seeing them every day, this behavior. It could be stronger with you and your friend's dog. It might not be. Maybe once you get your own dog, it's going to be a little bit more,
Yeah.
what do you say, it becomes more complicated, intertwined, this attachment, right?
Yeah.
uh, and that's how it is. It becomes more difficult the more time you spend with. But the funnily enough, the only thing you can do is spend more time with them and be equanimous with it. And yeah, and one more thing with respect to being okay with their death is to spend their time here and now, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
funnily, that's ironical, because like my partner and I will be talking about this, and we'll be like, wait, if they're going to die, and if we are talking about their death now, which means we are missing out on, so we're gonna go and sit with them, and
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
it. But these conversations helps us bring us here, because
Yeah. Yeah. Like
ultimately there is nowhere else to be.
yeah. Like death does two things mainly. It makes you value your own time in the way that I've said. So basically, if you understand you're going to die, and you can circumvent that programming that we have to hide and deny the fact that that's going to happen, then basically you make choices that are real. That's the short version, right? So I don't need to rant about that again. The other thing, though, is if I'm going to die, everybody else is going to die. Everything's going to die. And
Yes.
so not only is my life precious, but the other people in my life are precious. And if I want to make the most of them, then I need to spend time with them. Basically, that's what it boils down to. So I think this about my mum. Like my mum, she's getting older, and sometimes I just get so busy, like I'm caught up in my own life. I'm doing this, I'm doing that. And I don't necessarily feel like going to see my mum and having a cup of tea or something like that. But then I'll say to myself, oh, well, she's going to be dead eventually. So I should go and make the most and create some memories and have some quality time with my mum. And that's what I do. And so I try and see her as regularly as I can. And even just knowing that she's going to die one day and I'm going to die, it's caused a shift in the focus of the relationship. So there's no drama or anything like that. You know, like sometimes you have drama with your parents because you're getting triggered with your childhood stuff or whatever it is. Like none of that stuff bothers me anymore because I just think, okay, this person like me is temporary and I don't want to waste time on bullshit. So I'm just using my mum as an example. I try to be like that with all the important people in my life. But death in that sense, it's a gift because it shows you what life truly is. But I actually want to backtrack a little bit to what you were saying, right? So when you were talking about Vipassana, basically Vipassana, meditation, that kind of thing, it's tuning you into the same thing that death is tuning you into, which is an awareness of how things actually are. And again, because everything is ultimately the same, in my opinion, it goes back to the wholeness fragmentation thing. And this podcast ultimately is about how creativity is about allowing the unconscious to become conscious so that you can become more whole. And I think that all of us, not just all human beings, all life has a natural drive towards wholeness. It's constantly moving and flowing. If you look at a tree, I keep using this example recently. If you look at an apple tree or something, there is a process constantly going on beneath the surface that is allowing this fruit to materialize. And that is a process that you can't escape from it, but you can block it with your ego. And if you block it, that's when, you know, in relation to creativity, you lose touch with your creativity and you don't get the results that you want and blah, blah, blah. And the reason you block it is because of all the shame and the guilt and the trauma that we have beneath the surface, all the things we've sent into the shadow self, basically, the shadow territory, and how we have constructed, usually unconsciously, we've constructed an ego that wants us to block that process so that in the short term, we don't have to feel all those difficult emotions and everything. So the question I want to ask you, if it even is a question, but more of a prompt, I guess, is what do you think about that idea that there is a drive towards wholeness always? And if you can find something in your life to unblock your relationship with that drive, then things are just ultimately going to work out because you're going to be life enhancing instead of life denying.
Yes. Beautifully said. So I thought I heard you that if you're creative, we can push towards wholeness. But I think I got it wrong. I definitely believe that you meant it the other way, right? Because when we are whole, it's kind of, so creativity is a symptom, right? It's not the cause. You cannot be creative. No one tries to be creative. Like it's the same way. You cannot meditate, right? Meditation happens, right? Like you can prepare the surrounding for it the same way. The wholeness with respect to what you're saying is quite similar in this idea that the underlying shadows, right? It could be whatever you said, shame or anything, but it could be as small as parents not paying enough attention or not. They can take care of you so beautifully, like you could be given all the things that's necessary, like they do care for you, but they're subtle ignoring of you. Whenever the kid is seeking attention, the kid now has to do extraordinary stuff to gain parents' attention. And you have this whole hustle culture there because people are not they're seeking so much validation. You don't need that much validation. No one needs validation from anyone, right? And we we are at that point, we're so pushing ourselves to what? So when you say that we are not able to stop and see the process of that, roots nourishing the tree with the water and the nutrients, and the, I see this apple and the stem, it's like it's this umbilical cord, right, that goes inside and it's connecting,
Wow.
and then the umbilical cord stays with the apple, and while we eat it, we kind of admire it, that stem, it's so beautiful. But all these things, we only, again, it's the loop I was talking about. We are running so much because of our package that we don't have time to reflect
Yes.
upon. And
Yeah.
all these things of noticing apple, or noticing a grain of sand, right, a piece of dust, or I noticed my dog's poops. It's very interesting, very beautiful, right? You see guinea pig poop. I keep counting them. Not a guinea pig per day poops around 120, 150 pieces, right?
Wow.
They keep consistently eating dried grass, and they eat like 90% of the time, and they keep pooping, right? And all these things happens when we are not rushing somewhere, right? When we take away all these underground push drives that pushes us to do something, that our mind gets occupied. Oh, I need to be doing this. But there is no compulsion to do anything. Drop everything we are doing at that moment, and you see that that's where creativity lies. Because like when nothing is there to do, you simply see certain things, and
Yeah.
what's creative about, the funny thing about this world, right, there is no invention, everything is a discovery, right? You when people say they invent, it's just that it's not naturally there. Human had to intervene to find this particular combination and put them together, and now it's called an invention. But it's a discovery per se. The same way, there are no artificial stuff. If mushrooms are grown in ground by a particular set of beings that are helping it grow, it's natural, and then human intervenes to make LSD, then it's artificial. But that's not true. It's both natural and is in a similar way,
Yeah.
right? And that's where it is. Like when we stop and create that space in our consciousness, and when we just see things, and you see this combination work, and it's like a new thing comes to existence, right? And that's, I think, that brings us back to what you said about creativity. And again, that's a new loop that forms. When you're creative, you express it in beautiful ways, right? Like you don't express it in the normal ways of abusing others, or working 24 hours, or achieving high ranks, or occupying, like, I don't know. I'm not a huge fan of how these capitalistic viewpoints exist, but I don't need to get into that. But we wouldn't be doing this, right? It's all driven by a sort of underlying mental illness, which can be solved not by antidepressants or anything. You just have to be aware, and you be like, oh yeah, it's there, so what? Like that. And the funny thing about the whole shadow work is to just let it see within you. Oh yeah, I have this ugly nature, so what? To just understand and not act upon it is, it's great, right? Like, and acknowledgement is always the first step of almost everything, right? You just acknowledge it's there, and it's beautiful.
It's about stepping away from judgment, ultimately, right? So
Yes.
if you're caught up in fragmentation and ego, and you lack awareness of all this stuff we're talking about, ultimately, all you're doing is you're living according to a set of judgments that you've picked up from the outside world somewhere. And those judgments are stopping you. They're doing two things. Those judgments are either making you run around taking bullshit actions just for the sake of doing things, or for trying to force life through what your ego is telling you life should be when it never can be. Or two, it tells you to basically hold back and to hesitate because you're not good enough, or it's a stupid idea, or whatever it is. And so when you find space and you can drop into the wholeness, or drop into that feeling of realness that we're kind of alluding to, all of the judgment slips away. And when the judgment slips away, if you do act, if you take action, then it has to be from a place of acceptance and awareness. And if it's from a place of acceptance and awareness, then the action, it's kind of just organic. It's not forced by any conceptual ideas like capitalism, or how we think we should fit into society, or what mummy and daddy might think of us because we're seeking validation and yada yada.
Yeah.
It's just a more natural action. It's something that actually needs to happen. It's emergent. It's something that emerges rather than is forced upon life from the outside. And you can't really force anything. So if you do end up forcing it, you're just going to get bad results anyway. And that's what I think all this stuff is about. Getting to that place where the only action you're taking, or most of the action you're taking, is inspired action, or whatever word you want to use, real action that has come from a place of wholeness.
Yes. It's the word wei wu wei. Do you know about
Yeah,
it?
yeah.
Try not try. Yeah. It's pretty much that. It's funny. I've gotten to a point where I slowly realized I kept going to different defense mechanisms, which were, leading me to a particular sort of action. But ultimately, there comes a point, at least in my life, it came a point where I was completely tired of having these thoughts, of having to, run away from them or fulfill them or so on and on. And, and there is a moment of brightness that comes where you just give it up, right? So, as you said, it all comes down to the part where, like, don't force anything. Funnily enough, like, as much as sometimes common sense would go, you let it be. To let be is the only thing we have to learn. And if we learn that, like, that alone will change so many things. If the sun and earth formed at that particular interaction, and all these conceived to existence in this material form, in this plane, right? And everything is so grandeur, right? So much is so grandeur, but our ego is so limited to think we can control how it's going, right? There is no sort of control whatsoever. People might think they order pizza and it comes to the house. That's where it stops. But understand, even that is not under your control. The illusion of control exists, but it doesn't. So again, this goes back to what you said about judgment, right? So all these judgment happens, and when there is again, when there is not wholeness, when there is separateness, right? Like, for example, you're in this world, and there is only sunlight, right? 24/7 sunlight, right? There is no night, right? You wouldn't stop and say there is light now, because light exists because there is a time where light does not exist, right? So relatively, there is a crossing over to the other extreme, the polar opposite, and you make this line, the relativity in this dualistic world. Therefore, the judgment arises, right? And most of these judgments seem harmless, right? Because what is there to say today is day and night is night, right? But you have to understand, all these words don't have meaning, because it's the sun is the same, right? The nature of how light is created is the same. It's an illusion that's happening. Light is always there. You're not seeing it, right? And it's all those things, right? Once we stop drawing lines between stuff and understand that there is only a non-dual force behind all of this duality, that brings us back. And psychedelics, this is where it kind of helped me, because, like, I wouldn't have any difference between things, right? There is no boundary. How we crystally see that, oh, my bed is sitting on a bed frame, and then there is floor and so on. There is no boundary there. Everything is touching each other, right now, like, I'm breathing in oxygen and carbon dioxide, and the plants nearby are doing the opposite, and we are connected in sort of a way. Like, to be honest, we are just connected. Everything is connected. So even on this physical reality, there is only wholeness. That's the only truth. There is one being. There are no individual beings, right? That applies to the mental self, right? So you start with the mental work and try to eventually understand at the physical realm, because in physical realm, when you open your eyes, it's much more difficult, right? You see, for example, do you know about the Yulin Dog Festival?
No.
Yeah, so basically in Yulin, China, they have a dog meat festival where they not just eat dogs, they steal dogs from who are as pets. They put them in containers by 2 by 2 square feet, where 20 dogs fit, where there should be one dog, right? And they beat them so much. And this arises a lot of anger, and so much anger within me, and I stop and I'm like, I don't want to, what crap is this? And how is this in this physical reality? The person who is hitting is the same being as me. It's the same being as the dog. Like, how could you do it, right? And for that moment, all my intellectualization and rationalization doesn't work. The only thing that I could work is be equanimous at that point, because my anger is not going to help. But
Yeah.
my point being, in that physical reality where you see a intense abuse happens, and it, how do you not see that separateness, right? It's very difficult.
Yeah.
So, but it's easier. I truly believe it's much more easier to do the mental, to mentally see that there is no separateness, right? There is just this one being that's operating within your body. There is no ego. There is nothing else. There is no defense mechanisms. These are all concepts that originate when we are not present. When we are not aware, all these take up,
I think in that example of the people abusing the dogs.
Yeah.
I think the only reason you would do that, like abuse a dog, is if you're really, really, really fucking hungry and you need to survive. Maybe that would motivate people to do that. Like if it's literally a life or death thing. But if you're just being horrible, like it's always, always, always because of what you said. This all boils down to, which is the baggage thing. People have baggage, and it keeps them running towards unreal things. That person is not acting from a real place. They're acting from pure separation that they keep getting pushed into because of their own stuff. Like it's like the potentially like like the whole the golden calf thing, where they wanted to use this, or the scapegoat. Let's use that example. So a scapegoat is where ultimately you choose some creature as a vessel for all of your unresolved shadow stuff or your perceived sins and whatever else. And then when you kill that, you're tricking yourself into thinking that you've dealt with the emotional stuff. It's a similar thing. It's purely a way of all of the unreal ego fragmentation coming up with strategies to force life in such a way where it can feel like it's solving the problems that are caused by itself without actually changing anything, because it's only doing it on that symbolic level. And I think we're all real, but the problem is some people are living in a very unaware way because they're projecting all of their own shit basically out into the world, and then it's getting projected back at them, and that's dictating their behaviors. And it goes back to what we were saying about the action. And this thing that you said actually about the baggage, I think that sums up most of this stuff that we're saying. If you have too much baggage and you're not willing to face it in the short term because of the awareness that you need to transcend it, I always say the truth will set you free, but first it will piss you off and make you miserable. And the reason it will make you, it sets you free in the long term, but a lot of people aren't ready for that because they're going to have to basically wade through all this baggage. And I think that explains 99.9% of the problems on planet Earth, which is that people, they are real, but they blind themselves to that reality. And all these things that you're talking about are about getting back on that path to understanding so you can move towards wholeness. And I think even these dog abusers, they could wake up and have some kind of an epiphany where they return to wholeness, but it might take them longer or whatever because there's a bigger gap between the real and unreal in that case. But anyway, that's me rambling. We've reached the end of our allocated time, and it's gone very, very, very quickly. We've covered a lot. We dive straight into the death thing. We've gone over like the awareness stuff and like how the shadow can show up and be projected out, blah, 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 blah. My mind is a little bit blown. How would you sum this all up, if you even can? Because obviously there's a lot that's been said, but how would you sum this up? Have you got any final words of wisdom? And if somebody wants to talk to you or get in touch or whatever they might want to do with you, where can they find you?
To answer that question first, I'm there on LinkedIn.
Yep.
My name is Rangarajan. There is no words of wisdom apart from yes. we just the whole thing is we talked about the one and the same thing because if it's transitory in nature, like there is no planning for the future, there is no thinking about the past because everything takes care of itself. Just be here and now, and that's what's that's what will always happen, I
Yeah.
believe some people say that these times would be oh, it's beautiful times, these are rapidly changing times or something, technological innovations or so on and on, but that's not true. Every generation, every existence that has lived, for example, the first humans or the apes who did the stone fire, that would have been great exciting times, and move back, the first farming would have been even more exciting times. Likewise, exciting times will always exist because uh, as long as you're present, everything is exciting.
Yeah.
So don't look back or forward because that's all. You can do that, but there is nothing that will happen. It's pretty much like beating the dog. You just think it's harmless and it's happening in a dream world, right? But there is no reality to it. Reality, I believe, 99.9% of the beings that live on planet Earth are very present moment beings. It's humans. We what served as a tool to survive at a mass scale, right? What we see out there with the banding of this much a global society and being able to communicate and get over boundaries and not just play a game of like, oh, our 100 of us are a pack, and it's not tribal, it's getting closer. What has served as a tool to band us together is also has become the bane, has become the problem that's gonna stab us if we are not aware enough. It's like the knife. It's so simple. Like, you can either use the knife to cut the vegetable or cut yourself, and we have lost where the knife is, where the hand is, where the apple is, and we have become so blind. That's all. All we have to do is, when we look at our open our eyes, and we'll see ego is such not a bad thing. It's a tool. I'm going to use it to cut the right things, right? And yeah, I guess open your eyes. Look up to the sky.
Perfect.
Yes.
I love what you said. Everything takes care of itself. Like, if you can understand that and you can trust, then it all kind of dissolves. All this, it just dissolves. It's gone. If you understand, everything takes care of itself. So, Ranga, thank you so much for your time today. Like, I've really enjoyed this one. And we should talk again sometime, like do it again, because I could keep going. But anyway,
definitely, I had fun time too.
Yeah, so thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.